You're listening to the Monocle Daily, first broadcast on the 19th of December 2024 on Monocle Radio.
Does Europe, despite ample warning, really understand what it may be up against? Can the French president really style this shambles out until the year after next? And what is the worst Christmas present you have ever received or given? I'm Andrew Muller. The Monocle Daily starts now. Hello and welcome to the Monocle Daily, coming to you from our studios here at Midori House in London. I'm Andrew Muller. My guests Elizabeth Braw and Marie Leconte will discuss the day's big stories. And from Armenia, we'll find out why some Syrian refugees are not heading home just yet. Stay tuned, all that and more coming up right here on the Monocle Daily. This is the Monocle Daily. I'm Andrew Muller and I am joined today by Marie Leconte, political journalist and author, and by Elizabeth Braw, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and a columnist for foreign policy. Hello to you both.
Hi. Hello.
It is, as regular listeners like we have any other kind will be aware, the week where we have been asking people about their Christmas plans. And excitingly, I understand that we have controversy brewing in the studio here tonight because you, Elizabeth, are very pro-Christmas and you, Marie, much less so. Elizabeth, we'll go with you first. For the Christmas enthusiast, what are your plans?
Having the whole family around, cooking, decorating the house. Part of it has already been done by my son, who has done a marvellous job, and it's looking so festive. I'm really inspired.
And Marie is already miming, throwing a rope over a rafter. What are you actually doing?
I am going home to France to see my family. So one of the reasons why I dislike Christmas is that my family is essentially like the Middle East. Like, there's not actually that many people and we have a lot in common, and yet lots of people do not want to talk to each other or share the same room. So my brother and I essentially just have to spend 3 or 4 days eating Christmas meals with all the different factions, like kind of like UN peacekeepers. And by the end, it turns out you can, and I'm aware that's quite a small violin, but you really can get really bored of smoked salmon.
I mean, do you have animus against Christmas beyond your personal circumstances, though?
I do. And again, so I like to think of myself actually as a Christmas centrist normally. You know, I'm neither pro nor against, no strong feelings either way. But my problem is that we have terrorists to one side who keep insisting that Christmas should start earlier and earlier. You now start seeing Christmas stuff in shops in October. You start hearing Christmas music in November. It's too long. I think Christmas should be a week at most. I think, again, they've pushed me towards terrorism myself. It's just that they've gone too far.
See, I tend to come round to that way of thinking as somebody. I mean, for me, Elizabeth, I should explain Christmas is a bit like, I don't know, model railways. If other people are into it, then I'm pleased for them. It just doesn't interest me especially. But even as a Christmas enthusiast yourself, would you concede that we possibly do get rather too much of it?
We do, but it's not the fault of Christmas enthusiasts or supporters. It's the fault of the retail sector.
But the retail
they are trying to sell Christmas in October. That is the problem.
But they're selling it to people like you, not me and Marie.
Oh, I don't buy anything in October. I buy my Christmas decorations, food, presents in December, and it's only fools that are led into unhealthy habits by the retail sector in October. Because if you start buying Christmas gear in October, then you're tired of Christmas by the time it arrives.
Well, on that note of consensus, we will start with Europe in general and the anxieties inflamed by the prospects of Russia marching towards it and the United States wandering away from it. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, whose concerns on these fronts are not academic, has visited Brussels to meet incoming NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte and leaders of Ukraine's EU and or NATO allies. Rutte has called upon Europe to adopt what he called a wartime mindset and to look beyond the NATO threshold of 2% of GDP on defence to 3%, arguably a bit rich given that the Netherlands got nowhere near either during Rutte's long stretch as Prime Minister thereof. Elizabeth, we've now had nearly 3 years since Russia began its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Does it feel a bit like Europe has been doing more agonising than actually doing anything in that time?
Well, Europe is not just one thing. I think that's the point of departure. That is a problem. So some European countries have done an enormous amount, including by sending weaponry to Ukraine, by providing financing to Ukraine, and by receiving Ukrainian refugees. Poland, for example, has done a lot on both counts. Estonia, Sweden in recent years in the past couple of years, has sent a great amount of weaponry to Ukraine and has also received a great number of Ukrainian refugees. Not all European countries are that well behaved or are that supportive of Ukraine. I think that's one of the problems. And also, even in these countries that have done so much to help Ukraine, clearly or unsurprisingly, naturally, the willingness among the population to keep going with this level of support is waning, and it's understandable. It will happen in any country. You can only have that adrenaline of wanting to help another country for a certain amount of period, for a certain amount of time, and then it fades, and then it's up to leaders to try to convince the population that it's still the right thing to do. And that's where we are today. And the reason it matters so much is that we don't know what policy Donald Trump will pursue regarding Ukraine, whether he will limit, curtail, slash American support, or whether he will say this is a country worth supporting.
Mari, it has been certainly my observation for nearly 3 years, and I don't think it's an especially original one, that this all tends to get taken a lot more seriously in direct proportion to the distance the given European country is from a border with Russia.
Oh, no, absolutely. And I was recently talking to some sources who've just spent quite a lot of time in Poland and Lithuania. And what they were saying was that there is such an incredible sort of difference in mindset between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, whereby, Eastern Europe, correctly or incorrectly, we have no way of knowing. These countries are absolutely certain that Russia will invade at some point in the next few years. They may not do a full-scale invasion of the country, but maybe try some form of military action. That's very much for them a question of when, not if. And then, talking to those people saying, and then you kind of come back to Britain, but it could be Paris as well. It could be, kind of anywhere in Western Europe. There's this sense that, of course, we should be doing our bit and we should be sending some weapons to Ukraine and should be sending some money, etc. But there's no great sense of kind of urgency or no sense that, Russia, Putin may go further while he's still fighting in Ukraine or in a sort of post-Ukraine war sort of scenario.
I mean, how weird does the foot-dragging, Elizabeth, look from your neck of the woods, i.e. Scandinavia, where obviously the countries have had different approaches, but what they all have had in common between, all the way from Finland being extremely serious about its national defence, and Norway being a founder member of NATO, to Sweden's decades, centuries of only recently ended neutrality. But there was in all of them, and is in all of them, still a culture of preparedness, of national defence, of conscription, of being ready if necessary.
There really is, and this is why it's, I think, incredibly unhelpful to keep focusing on just defence expenditures. Because, yes, you need strong armed forces, but if you have strong armed forces and then nothing else, then you are not going to have, you're not going to be able to defend your country. So you need to have preparedness across the population, and that involves ordinary citizens, it involves the private sector, it involves civic organizations and so forth. You need all of that on top of strong armed forces. And when it comes to that softer bit, countries are just not very good at it. And Sweden did it extremely well during the Cold War, then dismantled it and is now building it up again. Finland has kept its version of it over the years. But you have very little of that in other countries. It has been discussed now for years, especially for the past 3 years. How do we build up that societal resilience? And it's just so hard because it's not just something the government can do. So how do you coordinate as a government? How do you coordinate what companies should do in a crisis? Do you force them to commit to certain actions? Do you practice with them? All of that is just incredibly complicated. It's much easier to focus on the armed forces, who they all work for the government. They follow orders, and the rest of society is not that easy. So that's why we have made slow progress, and that is unfortunate, because this is where we can make a huge difference in our countries.
And I worry as well that there's a bit of a vicious cycle kind of politically on a kind of domestic level, especially in Western Europe, where, again, the threat feels a bit more distant because you will have mainstream political parties saying, oh, well, people are very worried about the cost of living crisis, public services, etc. So we don't really feel we can talk endlessly about what goes on, in Ukraine, in Russia, etc. But the problem is, if the war were to worsen, there would be an even more palpable hit on the cost of living crisis in all those countries, etc. So people would be even less likely to listen. So it is probably quite hard to make people understand that even if you're being cynical and actually you're just caring about domestic issues, you have as a result to care about what goes on in that part of the world. And again, I think no one's quite tried to do that with the sustained effort that you would need for that to really get into the heads, I think, of citizens, especially in Western Europe.
To France now, where there is political turmoil. And yes, later in the show, to the Vatican, where there is Catholicism, and I know I've done that joke before, but I think we can all agree it's excellent. As President Emmanuel Macron continues in his endeavour to give each of his fellow citizens a lash at being Prime Minister for a bit, Mari, let us know if you have to leave quickly. There are calls for him to resign and allow an early presidential election. Granted that the most prominent of those calling is National Rally leader and twice defeated presidential candidate Marine Le Pen, who may have some sinister self-interested motive, but still. Murray, almost incredibly in the current circumstances, Macron can hang in there until April 2027 if he likes. The question is, should he?
That feels somewhat above my pay grade, I mean, to be honest with you.
If he's listening.
Emmanuel. I think it's a tough question. I think if I were him, actually, I would probably want to hang on, because I think one of the main problems at the moment is that there's no one obvious, who is not the far right, who could stand and actually unite the country, at least unite enough of the country. And that's partially his fault, because I think he managed to decimate essentially the kind of centre-right and the centre-left. It's partially the left's fault as well. So the left managed to work really well together during the snap election over the summer, and it then descended into a proper sort of Asterix-style brawl, which is what the left loves to do. And no single kind of leader or figure really emerged from that. So again, I think the problem is, if you were to call the election tomorrow, again, not entirely unreasonably, because the political situation in France is intractable at the moment. No one in the National Assembly can agree on anything. And clearly everyone hates Macron. Actually, that is arguably the one thing they can all agree on. But who else? You would just be handing the Élysée Palace to Marine Le Pen if you called an election tomorrow. I think that's the problem. And if I'm guessing in Macron's head, one of the main reasons why he managed to get elected in 2017 to an extent, but mostly in 2022, was because he was saying, I am the only person who can stand against Le Pen, who can win and who can stop the far right in their tracks. What is your legacy going to be if in the end what you do is that you give up even before the end of your allotted time and you do actually just let the far right in?
I mean, on which subject, Elizabeth, given, as Mari has sketched out, the likeliest outcome to an early presidential election would be President Marine Le Pen, do you think it's fair to say the rest of Europe is probably not terrifically enthused about the idea of Macron running that risk?
They are not, and it's also because there's uncertainty in other parts of Europe as well at the very same time.
In Germany, most obviously.
Indeed. And we just don't know what's going to happen in Germany. There's even less certainty in Germany than in France, because we don't know what the next election, which is going to be held in just a few weeks, what that election will result in, and whether those results will be such that a coalition can be formed. We have seen in various German states that they've struggled to form coalitions because different parties are not willing to govern with the AfD. But the AfD is now so strong that you have to be really creative about the sort of coalition that you put together, and that can include, as it now does in some states, the BSW, which is an untested quantity in German politics, and also a bit of a populist one. So it's just incredibly uncertain now in Germany, and for that reason Macron should do a good deed and remain in power. I'm sure that's not his first consideration, but he would really do a good deed.
But is part of his thinking as well, Mari, that this is the time for him to try and cement some sort of international legacy? Is it fair to say that he's kind of checked out of domestic politics, and he's basically just hoping that the Prime Minister of the week will take it from here?
Well, yes, and also I think it's both not the first time he's sort of clearly seemed disinterested in what happens domestically in France, but also not the first leader to go, ooh, things are not going tremendously well at home, but the world stage awaits me. But the problem with that is that, historically, that's not gone tremendously well for him. And I think especially in his first term, between 2017 and 2022, he really did try to come in, when Merkel was still in Germany. He tried to come in kind of onto the EU stage and go, well, we're creating this new axis. I have so many new ideas about the future of the European Union. And everyone kind of looked at him, I think, and shrugged a bit. Like he didn't quite go as far, I think, on that front as he could have. So he can certainly keep trying. But again, I'm not convinced that at the moment, on the global stage, and again, EU-wise, but also even more broadly, that a kind of centrist maverick technocrat is really what, people are looking for. I think he already looks like a slightly dated character, I think, politically.
And I have to say, I just watched one of the interviews with Angela Merkel in Germany about her new book. And she was the most powerful person in European politics for 16 years. And she's still the same person. She still speaks the same way. And now she too seems outdated because that sort of centrism and just do the reasonable thing, that feels incredibly...
Which also did not work. Part of the reason why, so many countries are in such a poor state is because of the policies of Merkel.
Totally. But she too seems... like a voice from a distant past, even though it's not very distant at all.
I mean, I won't hold you to any predictions, Mari, but given that it's obviously a pretty important job being president of France, it's arguably only going to become more important, especially if the United States sort of wanders off from Europe and NATO. As it is, the French president is commander-in-chief of the only country which is all at once in NATO and the EU and among the P5 of the Security Council. Any ideas, if it's not Marine Le Pen, like who is the next Le Pen buster?
What I will say, which is a slightly cowardly way out, is that at this stage of the electoral cycle, before the 2017 election, Macron had not announced that he was running yet, and not a single person in France, I think, would have said, I will vote for Macron. And then he won in 2017. Yes, I know numbers. I know how to count. So what I will say is that things can change, I think, very quickly in France. And I do think that people there are really, really fed up at the moment, but also there's clearly a very, very strong desire to actually probably rally behind someone who actually has an idea and is able, and which I realise is no mean feat, but is actually able to offer something that, people may want, or a bright future for France. So again, I think there's still time for someone to emerge, but if that could happen sooner rather than later, that would be quite nice. Because at the moment, again, I could not name a single person, I think.
Well, two glum tidings now for those who prefer to either celebrate or obliterate the festive season with helpings of Guinness. The dark stuff is running dry as Guinness's owner, Diageo, has imposed limits on supplies to pubs, citing what it called exceptional consumer demand. The limit applies only to hostelries in England, Scotland and Wales, where it is merely an annoyance and a disappointment, and not to pubs in the Republic of or Northern Ireland, where any such drought would be more akin to sacrilege. There are reports in Guinness-parched areas of some pubs issuing ration cards. Before we get properly into this, a benchmark view of Guinness. Elizabeth, are you broadly pro or anti?
Pro.
Correct.
The only possible view.
Correct answer. Mario, do you have a controversial take on this?
I just don't really like it. I don't feel especially strongly about it. I would drink one if it's in front of me, but I would never order it. It's a bit like, oysters, I guess.
Or
one
Christmas.
of those. Or Christmas. Just no... light negative.
OK, well, then why do we think, Elizabeth, who is clearly more troubled by the shortage, that it is having a moment? Is it that young people are pretending to drink it on Instagram?
Instagram has set so many new trends, so who knows? But this just goes to show that you can't predict cultural trends. They can shift at any moment. And just a few years ago, in fact, just a few months ago, people were predicting the death of pubs in the UK. And obviously, we have seen the loss of lots of pubs in recent years. And now, all of a sudden, we are seeing this. How did it come about? I don't know. Maybe this is something for which we should thank TikTok. In that case, it should not be banned. But it is...
Well, I think it should be if there's less Guinness for the rest of us.
I'm turning 33 in 10 days, so I feel like I'm meaning to stretch the meaning of young person a bit. But as someone who's with it,
you're
youth,
the closest we've got.
Yeah. And I shall do my best. But no, Guinness, which I found really interesting, became massive. So probably around 2 years ago, maybe 3 years after the pandemic, I certainly noticed that so many friends who I'd never seen with a Guinness in their life acting like, they'd been born sipping on a little Guinness. Like it has very much, I think, anecdotally at least, become a massive thing. Which is, I would personally say, quite annoying if you're going to go get a round in the pub and then you've got 4 people asking for Guinnesses and it's, oh God, okay, I will spend the rest of my natural life at the bar.
Yeah, that's basically your evening at that point.
It is, but yes, I think it's probably actually rooted in sort of fact or, changes in trends that Guinness is running out because so many people are drinking it now.
Interesting. Is it therefore, and this is a seamless pivot, Elizabeth, a cue to attempt what we have come to understand is a Swedish tradition, a frankly somewhat baffling one? This is the idea of a dry or white December, i.e. climbing on the wagon throughout the last month of the year? Is this a thing people do?
It is a thing that some people do, but it's. I don't think it's a TikTok worthy trend, or indeed one that will catch on thanks to any other social media network. But it's also the case that Swedish Christmas traditions have a lot of let's say, fortifying components to them. So it would be a pretty bleak Christmas without all those components.
Is it true, though, Elizabeth, that you still just cannot go out and buy tins in Sweden on a Saturday night?
Yeah. Why would you ever need to? You do it.
I wish I could do justice to the expression of incredulity that has descended upon Mari's visage at this point.
Why would you ever need to go to a supermarket? You do
Mari,
your...
why would you need to buy tins on a Saturday night?
What?
And answer that obviously not rhetorical question.
Sometimes you drink, but then you want to drink more and you've run out of alcohol. I don't, yeah.
Yeah, so you plan properly and you do your alcohol shopping on a Friday afternoon and you think about what you'll need and then you'll enjoy it even more.
Do you have a spreadsheet?
No, because I feel like, so I sort of hear you now, but I think I just really love the idea of, a bunch of kind of feral 19-year-olds sitting together at 11:30 a.m.
Wandering into depressing supermarkets.
And going, okay, how much do you know? Like, how much do you think you will drink tomorrow? Like, how many cans? That's not how youth works, I think. I don't know. Again, for adults, I sort of get it, and everyone will have wine in their house, etc. But I think for young people, you never know. You never know where the party may take you. You can't really go on a bender, I guess. Or then you're disappointed because you buy too much alcohol. So you're planning on a bender, but then you don't really want to drink it, but which presumably feels like failure. So
but then you go to a pub and have Guinness, whatever you like, because you don't have to drink alone in your house.
But what time do pubs or bars close at?
They stay open late. But I think this. I mean, the so-called system company, which is the alcohol monopoly, was created by the government way back decades ago when alcoholism was a problem, and it's a government monopoly. It was then, it still is, but now I think it has developed into a shopping experience, because it is, when you buy alcohol, it's unlike anything else, because you go in there, it's nicely presented, there are experts who can tell you what you should buy, advise you and so forth. Compare that to going to a supermarket where it's so depressing. You're on your own selecting between bottles that I
think that's part of the charm, especially, I think in Britain what you really want is to embrace the corner shop, not the supermarket. We don't go to a corner shop and go, oh, I have the choice between, for some reason, South African beer, wine from Botswana, and one single brand of vodka, which is Moroccan. I think that's a really nice.
Just finally on this, Mari, because I know we do have similar views on the subject of broadly this time of year. Is it as big a mystery to you as it is to me, and this is a Northern Hemisphere slant on the question, why, if people are going to pick any given month of the year not to drink, they would pick December or January? Those are the 2 months where surely any reasonable person most wants to.
Yeah, I don't really get it, but so to clarify, so people don't drink before Christmas but then drink at Christmas, correct? Or
no, they do dry December.
But even Christmas?
Yeah, well, I haven't investigated them. Could be that they say they're going to do dry Christmas.
I had quite a good joke of saying, is it actually a bit like people getting married, or you have to spend a night apart before your wedding night so you can really indulge on your wedding day? But no, in that case, I have Andrew. I have nothing. I don't even have my gags. So I have no idea where you. But my problem is that you also would not want to spend your summer dry because it's so nice outside.
Yeah, I know you can't win, can you?
No.
Dry. What's a sort of nothing month no one cares about? March.
Dry Easter.
Dry Easter.
That's a nice week.
Yeah. But it being this time of year, we should recognise the fact that this time next week, non-zero numbers of people will be contemplating a number of new possessions and wondering of at least some of them, how long they have to keep them in their homes before flinging them into the skip, which they can wrap back up and palm off on some other poor sap next year, and whether their nearest and dearest really know them at all, etc. We are talking, therefore, about just bad Christmas gifts. And again, to establish a benchmark, Elizabeth, have you ever received a Christmas gift from somebody you might have assumed would have known you better and found yourself just thinking, what the hell is this?
I haven't, but I have given my husband a very poor Christmas gift.
Excellent. What was it?
Well, I told him I would buy him a coat, and then I didn't.
So you just bought him nothing?
I just bought him nothing, and he generously never mentioned this fact ever again.
So how did you style that out? It's Christmas morning, or presumably Christmas Eve, because that in the Nordic countries tends to be when the gift exchange happens, and he hands over whatever he has, I'm sure, thoughtfully chosen for you, and you just reply, oh, God, it's that day, isn't it? God, just slipped my mind, sorry.
No, I said, I want to buy you a coat, but since I wouldn't want to buy it without you, let's, it was a nice gift certificate, and we'll go and buy you a coat, and then we never did.
So he still never got his coat?
No.
Do you still have the gift certificate?
I think he got lost in a move.
That is shocking. The poor man.
Exactly.
He's been shivering.
I will tell him you said so.
I mean, he won't be listening because he's burned his radio for warmth. Murray, have you ever given or received anything that failed to hit the mark?
Both. So I think we're not amazing at Christmas as a family. So my dad especially, and I feel bad because it's such a cliche thing about like dads of the world. But no, my dad, who's an otherwise great man, I should say, but like, really rubbish at presents, and he really excelled himself about 5-6 years ago, I think. He got me a book. Fine, I read and stuff.
Books good.
The book was number 2 of a trilogy.
Amazing.
And so the best thing about this is that I was polite, and I didn't. And then he got cross with me because I didn't take it back with me to London. And I was like, well, yeah, it's a book in French. Like, it would be really hard for me to find 1 in 3 in French in Britain.
Is there any chance he did it on purpose? Because if he did, that's kind of magnificent. As just like an incredibly irritating, passive-aggressive gift to give somebody.
Honestly, I think we're just a family who are quite prone to light breakdowns. And so it's probably, No, because I was about to say, so that the year... So 2016, I remember, 2016 was not a good year for me. Arguably not a good year for like the US or Britain really either. And I was really stressed, and my work was really stressing me out. And I just bought to everyone Scottish shortbread from Heathrow Airport. Mm-hmm. But I was I think, bless my relatives, I was so obviously highly strung and really barely keeping it together that Christmas. They were like, oh my God, Marie, thank you so much. Shortbread, our favourite. Well, I was like, I just didn't have time. I just didn't have time to buy anything. They're like, we love it so much, Marie.
And did they all talk to you in that tone of voice in which you address somebody who's having a massive meltdown on the tube?
Yeah. Yeah, for a week.
Excellent.
I'm better now.
That's what they all say, Murray. Is there a secret, do you think, Elizabeth, to buying a good Christmas gift? Obviously, getting them literally anything at all is a start. But once you've cleared that bar?
Well, you have to think about what they are interested in. I mean, it seems obvious, but what they are interested in may not be what you see advertised on the telly or in shop windows. So you have to think a bit for yourself. And, for example, you might want to go to some sort of second-hand or flea market outfit where you'll find totally unusual items that they may appreciate more than the expensive item you've seen in a shop window, expensively advertised by that company. And so, I think the more unusual you go, within reason, of course, the more you may find that or hit that spot.
So you're suggesting putting actual effort into it. That is disheartening. Murray, when not in an advanced state of existential crisis about the fate of Western civilization, do you have any particular sort of tricks or ideas or templates you pursue for finding the perfect Christmas gift?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Or does everyone just still get shortbread? You've inaugurated a tradition.
No, set the expectations very low. So then when you do have a good idea, because I believe people
That's
only have...
good advice for life in general.
It is. So
Yeah.
I think everyone will only ever have 1 to maybe 3 good idea for presents in their year, every single year. So you can't really hit the mark with everyone. So yes, I think don't buy anything really amazing, but then for each person, at least every 3 or 4 years, you've really got to knock it out of the park and really surprise them. I think that's what I do. So taking my mum to Rome for her 60th next year. And last year I bought her a poster. So,
And also, it keeps them on their toes.
Exactly.
Well, on that festive thought, Murray Leconte and Elizabeth Braw, thank you both for joining us. And finally, on today's show, Syrian refugees around the world are, of course, celebrating the fall of Bashar al-Assad, and many are planning to return to their country. But in Armenia, refugees from one Syrian minority group say they are more cautious about what the future might hold. Hannah Lucinda Smith reports now from Yerevan.
It's lunchtime at the Zatar Pizzeria in Yerevan, the Armenian capital, and there's one topic of conversation among the customers: Syria. This is one of dozens of Middle Eastern restaurants that have opened up in this city in the Caucasus over the past decade, and its owners, like most of its customers, are Syrian Armenians, part of a community that once numbered around 100,000 before the war broke out. After 2011, many fled the country, fearing persecution from both Bashar al-Assad and Islamist rebel groups. And most of those who left came here to Armenia, bringing their rich Levantine cuisine with them. With the fall of Assad earlier this month, many are now weighing up whether to return.
The Armenian people, it's for Syria, Aleppo, Damascus, Homs, Latakia, Kamishli, all Syria. We have Armenian people.
That's Mike, the manager of Zatar. Like almost all of the Syrians I spoke to in Yerevan, he didn't want to give his last name, and that's a sign of the concerns that many here feel for the future. Syria's Armenians are Christians, and like many of the country's minority groups, some saw Assad as their protector against radical Islam. Assad also used the minorities, playing divide and rule within his country by presenting himself as their only hope for survival. Most are glad to see the end of a brutal era, but now they're waiting to see what happens next. This is Arvo, who arrived in Armenia in 2013 and has since studied, graduated and found work here. He's also taken Armenian citizenship, and he was pleased to see the end of Assad.
So I felt myself also as part of the larger community of Syria. Although I'm Armenian, but I didn't say, I do not have anything to do with it. No, I was also happy. I felt kind of those people I saw, they were trying to do something. Finally, they could. It was a victory for, let's say, democracy, although we can't say from now. We'll see if really democracy will be the rule of law or things.
Until he came to Yerevan, Arvo lived in Aleppo, like the majority of Syria's Armenians. In 2019, the government of Armenia deployed peacekeepers to the city as part of a humanitarian mission. That mission was halted on November the 30th as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, a rebel group that was formerly affiliated with Al-Qaeda, took control of the city. On December the 8th, the day that Assad's regime fell, Yerevan announced that it was temporarily relocating its embassy in Damascus to Beirut. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham's leader, Ahmet al-Shah, formerly known as Abu Mohammed al-Jolani, has tried to reform the image of his group in recent years, and he's promised that all of Syria's ethnic and religious groups will be treated equally and fairly. And Arvo says that is giving him some hope.
They seem to be like doing have a righteous plan. I want to believe that. Otherwise, there's no hope. They not really have a clear, clean background. But as they act now, it gives hope to all of Syrian people.
But there's another factor, the Syrian economy, which has collapsed in recent years. Many Syrian Armenians are business people, and they've re-established themselves abroad. There's also widespread destruction back in Syria, and many people from all groups do not have homes to return to. In the longer term, the question is whether Syria can rebuild its complex social tapestry that the Syrian Armenians were part of. Sarkis Balkhan, who's worked with the Armenians who fled Syria and monitors the dynamics of the country, is doubtful.
Aleppo pre-2011 was probably 45 to 50,000 Armenians. Today there's maximum 10,000 Armenians left in Aleppo. So I would say about 60 to 75% of the population of Armenians have left Syria and ended up in Lebanon, Canada, Australia, Europe, Armenia, some in the United States and some in Gulf countries. And that is essentially the vast majority of Armenians that remain in Syria today are those who no longer have the financial means to move to Armenia, Lebanon, or elsewhere. I think the majority of them are forced to stay, but depending on what kinds of laws and restrictions are placed or not on minority groups, they'll make a decision.
For Monocle in Yerevan, I'm Hannah Lucinda-Smith.
Thank you, Hannah. And that is all for this edition of the Monocle Daily. Thanks to our panellists today, Marie Leconte and Elizabeth Braw. Today's show was produced by Laura Kramer and researched by Maisie Ringer. Our sound engineer was Steph Chungu. Playing us out, The Replacements in honour of lead guitarist Slim Dunlap, who has died aged 73. Dunlap joined the influential Minneapolis group late in their career, playing on their final two albums, Don't Tell a Soul and All Shook Down. He'd met the group while he was working as a janitor at legendary Minneapolis club First Avenue, and his playing lent the Replacements a soulful edge which suited their journey away from the furious punk rock of their earlier records. This, from Don't Tell a Soul, is We'll Inherit the Earth. I'm Andrew Muller here in London. The Daily returns at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for listening.